Good evening and welcome to Aware on the Air, presented by members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort, a local Champaign, Urbana peace group. I'm Carl Estabrook. We're recording this at noon on Tuesday, April 24th in the studios of Urbana Public Television, Urbana, Illinois. Our subject is the wars the U.S. government is waging around the world and the racism we display to those we're killing, in accord with the Latin proverb, proprium humani ingeni est odisse cum laestris. It's human nature to hate those you have injured. At this moment, the U.S. is making war in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Pakistan, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen, principally to control the flow of oil out of the Mideast and North Africa, which the U.S. uses as a weapon against its economic rivals from Germany to China. Thousands of U.S. troops are killing people in these countries, although most Americans are barely aware of it. More than 250,000 U.S. troops are stationed in 1,000 U.S. bases on foreign soil, most of them ringing Russia and China. The 70,000 members of the U.S. Special Operations Command are active in 3/4 of the countries of the world. Their activities include kidnapping, we call it rendition, torture, and murder. As the rest of the world recognizes, but Americans don't, they're nothing less than American death squads. The rest of the world recognizes that the U.S. today is what Martin Luther King called it long ago, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, an international criminal surpassing all others. But most Americans don't know that, protected as they are by government and media propaganda. What we do here at Aware on the Air is try to encourage our fellow citizens to find out about and oppose U.S. government killing around the world. A harrowing image taken after the Saudi-led bombing of a wedding party in Yemen last Sunday showed a young boy clinging to his dead father's body. But it's a safe bet he won't become the face of the war in the mainstream media, because of course that war is sponsored by the United States that supports Saudi Arabia in its attacks on Yemen. Photos and footage were taken after the bombing, which happened in a remote village in the northwestern province of Hajj. Appearing to be aged 7 or 8, the boy tightly grasps the body of a man, grabbing his shirt and repeating, "No, no, no," as rescuers try to take him away. People underground told the reporters the boy insisted his killed father was just sleeping and would soon wake up and take him to their home village not far from the one that was bombed by the U.S. Saudi attack. He most probably remained there for hours, judging by how some of the images were taken at night, some in the morning. An RT cameraman said the father's body was the last one to be removed from the scene, and the boy stayed with it to the very end. Here's a little prediction. This boy will not feature at prime time in the mainstream media, regardless of how heart-wrenching are his little figure and his fruitless defiance. No well-paid anchor with perfect makeup will say in a tearful voice how she cannot look at him. No correspondent will confront the Saudi foreign minister, showing him the pictures saying, "This is a war crime, sir." At the UN Security Council, his tragedy will not be used to denounce a criminal regime killing civilians with impunity. A boy needs to be a bombing victim in another country to get this kind of attention in the West. Somewhere where the bombs killing civilians are not supplied by the US or the UK. Where obvious signs of malnutrition would not be a silent accusation against Saudi Arabia, which blocks the supply of food, medicine, and fuel to people opposing its invasion. One needs to be in Syria, not Yemen. The mainstream media apparently have a very selective approach to child victims of militant violence, according to which many are simply not worthy of sympathy and coverage. A blind spot covers the Gaza Strip, where children were hurt and killed in the past week by Israeli soldiers manning the border wall. Or Ukraine's rebellious east, where children were killed by shelling in their dozens in 2014, when post-coup authorities in Kiev deployed the army to bring the rebels to heel. or in any other place in the world where the violence is committed by the right side. The 50-something people killed in the Yemeni wedding were simply added to the statistics of the war, eventually making their way to the latest report by the UN or Amnesty International. They are unlikely to affect Saudi Arabia's ability to purchase Western weapons, receive Western intelligence for bombings, or gets refueled in the air by American planes. One does have to wonder what that boy will grow up to be. You're watching Aware on the Air. We're talking about American wars, and unfortunately there's a lot of stories this week about children and death. One peculiar one involving young Alfie Evans in Great Britain. It's an illustration of the fact that the right to life goes well beyond opposition to abortion and opposition to war. The parents of a seriously ill little kid, Alfie Evans, have been embroiled in a legal battle in Britain over his life support treatment. This is how events unfolded since his birth in 2016. Alfie was born in Liverpool to his parents, Tom Evans and Kate James, then 19 and 18, respectively. In December, Alfie was admitted to Alder Hey Children's Hospital after suffering seizures and remains there during the next 12 months. Hospital bosses say they are liaising directly with Alfie's family after disagreements over his treatment. His parents say the hospital has applied to the High Court in Britain to remove parental rights and withdraw ventilation, that is helping the baby to breathe. Mr. Justice Hayden, British judge, begins overseeing the case at a public hearing in the Family Division of the High Court in London. Alder Hey, that's the hospital, says continuing life support treatment would not be in Alfie's best interests, but his parents disagree and say they want permission to fly him to Italy for treatment. The judge says he will make a decision on what's best for Alfie. Lawyers acting for the hospital tell a High Court hearing that further treatment for Alfie is unkind and inhumane. One of Alfie's doctors tells the judge there's no hope for the youngster, who is in a semi-vegetative state from a degenerative neurological condition that medics have not been able definitively to identify. The judge tells the court, Alfie looks him in the eye, the father of the boy tells the court that his son, Alfie, looks him in the eye and wants his help. The judge rules in favor of hospital bosses, saying he accepts medical evidence which shows that further treatment is futile. 3 Court of Appeal judges began analyzing the case after Alfie's parents mounted a challenge to the High Court ruling. The family asked for an appeal hearing to be adjourned for a few weeks so they can discuss the ruling with lawyers, but the judges refuse. Alfie's parents asked for the case to be considered by a Supreme Court justices. The Supreme Court justice refused to give the couple permission to mount another appeal. Judges at the European Court of Human Rights rejected a bid from Alfie's parents for them to examine issues relating to the toddler's future, saying they find no appearance of any human rights violation. Pope Francis voices support for Alfie's parents, writing, quote, "It's my sincere hope that everything necessary may be done in order to continue compassionately accompanying little Alfie Evans and that the deep suffering of his parents may be heard." The judge endorses an end-of-life care plan for Alfie drawn up by specialists. Protesters gather outside the hospital as Alfie's father insists he has the right to take him home. Alfie's parents argue he is being wrongly detained at the hospital and make a habeas corpus application, a legal maneuver which requires a court to examine the legality of the detention. The baby is being detained in the hospital. Judges at the Court of Appeal in London rule against them and again uphold the decision of Mr. Justice Hayden. Merseyside police launched an investigation into, quote, instances of verbal abuse and acts of intimidation among protesters outside the hospital. People who are protesting what the hospital is not doing in regard to the kid. Alfie's parents apologized, saying they didn't intend to harm or cause conflict or upset. They obviously just wanted to take care of their kid. The boy's father flies to Rome and meets the Pope, who makes the comment that I quoted a moment ago. In April, the Supreme Court rules against Alfie's parents for a second time, refusing them permission to appeal the decision. The couple make an application to the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg to take Alfie to Rome for treatment. The European Court of Human Rights refuses the application made by Alfie's parents, saying it is inadmissible. About 200 protesters gather outside the hospital and maintain a vigil. Alfie is granted Italian citizenship in a bid to facilitate moving him to Italy to receive treatment. A high court judge dismisses new submissions made in private by the lawyers for Alfie's parents via telephone. This week, life support is withdrawn by doctors at the hospital, and the boy's father says that his son has been breathing on his own since Sunday. He says doctors are gobsmacked, a British expression means very surprised, that his son is breathing 9 hours after his life support ended. Alfred Hay Hospital responds that it will not be issuing updates on Alfie's condition out of respect for his privacy. Now, as that case goes on, the questions of medical treatment and the right to life obtrude for all of us, I think. You're watching Aware on the Air. We're talking about the events of the week and the importance of it for American war making. Much of our research comes from Dr. No, J.B. Nicholson, and he sends us the following notes for this week. He says, I'm increasingly disappointed in Democracy Now! RT, for example, the Russian national service like the BBC in Britain, is eating Democracy Now's lunch when it comes to debunking the lies that ostensibly explain attacks and wars. Dr. No is referring to the fact that Democracy Now! For many people in this country has been a source of news and information from around the world outside of the rather strict interpretive limits put on it by mainstream media. But to our dismay, Democracy Now! Recently has shown a terrible tendency to imitate the worst excesses of that same mainstream media. For example, interviewing the public to put Russiagate, Skripal, the Salisbury scandal, and the recent Syrian bombing into context. Interviews with people that the UK and the US by proxy, since the US says they will trust the UK on the Salisbury affair, claim are Russian bots. This was quite striking this week when the account of these Russian bots was shown to be false. The account that was mainstream media and mainstream UK media, as well as the supposed liberal media, Democracy Now!'s stock and trade. All it takes is questioning the UK's narrative, and you're not ready to be heard by UK corporate media and government, but you can get on Democracy Now!, apparently. Remember when Democracy Now! Used to care about interviewing journalists in events like these because they thought it important to get out lines not in keeping with the government narrative? not now. The latest Democracy Now! News on the keyword Skripal, the guy who was supposedly poisoned in Salisbury, is from March 30th, when Russia's tit-for-tat reaction to Russian diplomats being kicked out of U.S. allied countries meant kicking out the same number of diplomats from Russia. Democracy Now!'s reporting on the Skripal reaction from Russia was one sentence. Russia denies carrying out the nerve agent poisoning, close quote. That's all Democracy Now! Had to say about it. No indication of even obvious salient information about the alleged poisoning, like to how the Skripals weren't dead from a substance widely said to be lethal. That was too investigative, I guess, for Democracy Now! This is far too little to be fair to Democracy Now!'s audience, and far too old to be relevant for a developing case that points to another narrative. So there's no chance of Democracy Now! Telling its audience that the mainstream reportage about the Lev Novichok poisoning, the Russian, semi-Russian word meaning sort of newbie poison, why it's not to be believed and why. The Guardian newspaper, which has played a very complex and appalling role in regard to the Russiagate controversy, as a leading liberal paper in London, in Britain, with all the problems that liberal accounts have recently had. The Guardian simply repeats UK government propaganda without crediting actual sources. And one of those things where they say, government sources said, experts said, so forth. Or doing their own legwork, the legwork that RT, for example, and even Sky News, the commercial British news channel, apparently did to verify published claims. Sky News spoke with Twitter user Ian56789, one of the Russian bots, according to the US and the UK, and RT had an interview with Twitter user Partisan Girl, another Russian bot, according to the US-UK account, both of whom were alleged to be Russian bots for saying things challenging the government narrative, like pointing out journalists on the grounds in Duma, in Syria, can't find any evidence of a chemical attack. We know there has to be one in Syria because, of course, it was carried out by the people the U.S. is trying to overthrow in Syria. It turns out Partisan Girl is not a machine, but an Australian blogger of Syrian descent named Maram Susli. The Guardian said she made 2,300 posts in a 12-day period, and therefore Partisan Girl was a Russian bot. Quote, Russia used trolls and bots to unleash disinformation onto social media in the wake of the Salisbury poisoning, according to fresh Whitehall analysis. Whitehall means the British government. Government sources said experts had uncovered an increase of up to 4,000% in the spread of propaganda from Russia-based accounts since the attack, many of which were identified as automated bots. One bot, Ian56789, was sending 100 posts a day during a 12-day period from 7 April. God, I'd do that. And reached 23 million users before the account was suspended. It focused on claims that the chemical weapons attack on Duma had been falsified using the hashtag false flag. Another Partisan Girl reached 61 million users with 2,300 posts of the same 12-day period. This, according to The Guardian, an example of nefarious Russian meddling. But both Ian56789 and Partisan Girl are not bots. They're Twitter.com accounts used by real people. So Susli, the Partisan Girl, rightly pointed out in her RT interview, the British government, they can't even confirm that I'm not an automaton. How can we believe anything they have to say about the evidence they have for Skripal and Syria's chemical attacks? Susli told RT she's, quote, only posted 900 tweets in 30 days, according to her reading her own account's analytics. And as I say, unfortunately, that doesn't even seem particularly odd to me. The false number comes from the Atlantic's DFRL lab, in particular a man called Ben Nimmo, head of the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab. The Atlantic Council is a dangerous neocon organization in the U.S. He's obviously been fudging these numbers because they're not what the analytics show. As Partisan Girl continues, as the article about Partisan Girl continues, the Atlantic Council is funded in part by the Syria campaign, the same outfit that is behind the so-called White Helmets, and therefore has a vested interest in attacking anyone who brings up the connection between the White Helmets group and Al-Qaeda. Another member of the EFR lab is Elliot Higgins, also known as Bellingcat, who posts a great deal. As a chemist, Susley, the Partisan Girl blogger, challenged Higgins' armchair analysis of the 2013 alleged gas attack in Syria and says he's had a vendetta against her ever since. Susley, Partisan Girl, writes, as a result of my exposing this, Higgins, had one of his associates write an email to my university accusing me of experimenting with sarin. This is the DFR lab we're dealing with. They're fudging numbers, they have personal vendettas, they have no credibility, and these are the people UK Prime Minister Theresa May is using as evidence to suggest that I'm an automat. She's not alone in this. She rightly points out, unfortunately, these are dangerous times. These are times of war. We're heading closer to perhaps worse than the Cold War was. So I expect things to get worse. I've seen the censorship. My Facebook account has been shut down. They tried to shut down my YouTube account. I'm not sure how long I'm going to be staying online, but I'm going to continue as long as I can. She also pointed out that comparable lies were used to get the invasion of Iraq going. The White Helmets group has been much talked about and used by mainstream media and indeed many liberal sites as an indication of the nefarious activity of Russians and Syrians, the Russians and the Syrian government in Syria. Where do the White Helmets get their money? In fact, from the U.S. The Western powers gave $12 million, and the State Department's Heather Nauert confirms that the rescues are on the payroll. Quote, this is from the State Department spokesperson. As far as I'm aware, all of the work still continues. People's bills are being paid. If anything, that's a change to that. If there's anything that's a change to that, I'll let you know. Question, U.S. contributions are still flowing? Now, as far as I know, they're all still in play. This is radically different coverage about the White Helmets than we get from Democracy Now!, such as the glowing reportage they received on an earlier issue, which refers to them uncritically as rescue volunteers, where does Democracy Now! At the very least explain why a U.S.-backed organization might not be seen as trustworthy, as Democracy Now! Unfortunately seems to find them. Point 3, where's the evidence behind the accusation that Russia is highly likely to be behind the Skripal poisoning, the poisoning of the ex-double agent in Salisbury, England? There isn't any. There is evidence the UK government is feeding us more lies. A good summary of the Skripal case so far: this case consists of an apparently lethal nerve agent in which 0 humans and 2 pets died. Some say the pets died from being locked up in the house for several days with no food. They were Skripal's property, a cat and a guinea pig, both killed by the UK government, likely to hide the evidence there was no nerve agent that killed them. There's the UK making claims about the source of the poison. It's Russian, we're told, but they're relying on a lab that doesn't back them up in their claims, and years of published formulas indicating there are plenty of labs around the world that could have made what the UK was alleged to be, in effect, this Novichok nerve toxin. The Russian diplomats were kicked out of the UK and allied countries, and war-provoking tensions were raised, apparently, for no good reason. Meanwhile, Russian sanctions, or sanctions, further sanctions on Russia, are being proposed and aggressively put forward by the British government and by elements in the Trump government. There are problems with that, on the basis of supposed Russian responsibility for this curious case in Salisbury. There are other aspects of this event that feed into the remarkably difficult question of the Trump administration's reaction to Russia that has produced the hysterical Russiagate nonsense among American liberals, attempting to prove that Trump is a traitor, that Trump is treasonous, that Trump is working for Vladimir Putin. This is madness of a very high order, growing out of the destruction of the political establishment's candidate for president in the last presidential election. I'm frankly astonished, after years of following the American liberal tradition, the American political establishment, at the lengths they're willing to go in order to overcome the great threat represented by Donald Trump. Let's be clear what that threat is. The threat is that Trump will do a deal with Vladimir Putin, that peace will break out between Russia and the U.S., that the long attempt of the Obama administration to expand war provocations against Russia, quite an amazing attempt, once again not well reported in American media, but it included overthrowing an elected government in Ukraine, moving tanks to the border of Russia, provoking Russia response in Syria. This amazing belligerence of the Obama administration, not much remarked upon in the American news, was criticized by Trump in the campaign. That was his major sin. We're not going to keep up the war provocations against Russia, he said. The American political establishment went nuts, and when their candidate didn't win, she would, of course, have kept up the war provocations against Russia. They've moved heaven and earth to try to make sure that Trump's threat that peace will break out with Russia will not be accomplished. This is a very dangerous situation, but the real traitors in this case are not the Trump administration, but the American liberal establishment that's trying to produce a war. That's treasonous. You're watching Aware on the Air. Our job is to talk about the war provocations, the war actions of the United States. And I want to keep on this theme for a minute before we shift to some other questions about wars and the threat of war elsewhere. This is a piece by the longtime editor of the website antiwar.com, which has published serious anti-war materials as Democracy Now! Once did, and antiwar.com continues to do so. Its editor, Justin Raimondo, writes as follows. He says, "Poor Nikki Haley." Nikki Haley is the American ambassador to the United Nations. You've seen her on television probably. Poor Nikki Haley. She doesn't get that having presidential ambitions, as she does, and actually being the president are two different things. She went ahead and announced new sanctions on Russia and was promptly contradicted by the White House, which averred that Nikki is confused and that no new sanctions are contemplated. Quote, "I don't get confused," said Nikki, and yet she clearly doesn't understand that nobody voted for her. They voted for Donald J. Trump, who campaigned on a platform of, quote, "wouldn't it be good if we could get along with Russia," close quote. Trump's preferred Russia policy has a mandate from the voters, and yet we don't see it being implemented. Why is that? A remarkable bit of reporting in the Washington Post perhaps explains what is happening in the White House. When the phony poisoning of Sergei Skripal was cited by the usual suspects as evidence of Russian perfidy, despite the lack of credible evidence that the Russians were responsible, the Europeans expelled Russian diplomats, and Trump went along with it, specifying that we would expel an equal number, that is, a number equal to each individual country. When he discovered that his aides had lied to him, and that the U.S. expelled the total number expelled from Europe, quote, there were curse words, a lot of curse words, i.e. coming from Donald Trump, that his orders for a tit-for-tat expulsion had not been followed, but a mass expulsion had been arranged by his aides, quote, in the White House. Surrounded by warmongering liars, such as Nikki Haley, Trump is being held hostage in the White House. At least that's what the Washington Post would have us believe. Quote, some close to Trump say the recent measures are the product of an ongoing pressure campaign to push the president to take a more skeptical view of the Russian leader, Putin. Others note that Trump's ongoing unease with his own policy. Let's have that once more. This is the Washington Post now writing, others note Trump's ongoing unease with his own policy. Even as his administration has ratcheted up the pressure on Putin's inner circle, Trump has continued in recent weeks to make overtures to the Russian leader, congratulating him on his election win, and a move that frustrated his national security team, inviting him to visit the White House. His own policy? But is it his policy, or is it being imposed on him by a White House staff that seems to be working against him, and a deep state apparatus that is actively seeking to oust him, to remove him, impeachment or otherwise? Trump's aides combined to convince him to support arming with lethal aid the Ukrainian government, installed by the Obama administration, which was busy slaughtering its own people. Trump refused initially, saying, I want peace, words which must have caused Haley, Mattis, that is the defense secretary, and the rest of the warmongering hacks no small amount of heartburn. When Trump finally allowed himself to be hectored into it, he did it on the condition that it be kept under wraps. But the lethal arming of the Kiev government. But the war party and their deep state allies, always eager to advertise their power, leaked it. Trump, we were told, was furious. But what's done is done. And then came the Skripal poisoning, another occasion for his traitorous aides to play their role as saboteurs. Quote, initially, the president was hesitant to believe the intelligence that Russia was behind the attack in England, in Salisbury, a fact that some aides attributed to his contrarian personality and tendency to look for deeper conspiracies. To persuade him, his advisors warned that he would get hammered in the press if he was out of step with U.S. allies, officials said, close quote. Now remember, this is the Washington Post account of the pressure on Trump. Yes, only because a contrarian personality would demand proof, something that we have not seen as yet of the Salisbury poisoning. The assessment of the Brits and our alleged allies in Europe was made on the basis of social media reports. In short, we're taking the word of the Army of Islam that occupied Douma. Because jihadis affiliated with al-Qaeda wouldn't lie, would they? Oh, but to doubt these head-chopping barbarians would be, quote, to look for deeper conspiracies. Irony never reads very well in contexts like this, but we should see the contradictory pressures, to put no finer point on it, that the presidency is subject to. The real Trump, as opposed to the Trump who is sanctioning Russia bombing Syria and arming Ukraine, is closer to the Trump who campaigned for a foreign policy of American first and promised no more regime changing, no more interventions. He was in constant conflict with his national security advisor, now replaced, H.R. McMaster, a real Russia hater. Quote, anytime McMaster came in with a recommendation, Trump always thought it too much. They were oil and water on everything. So Trump's natural impulse was, if this is your recommendation, it must be too far, close quote. But hold on, how can this be? Isn't the president the most powerful person on earth? Doesn't he, or she, determine U.S. foreign policy? Well, no. The president is not a dictator, nor is he the final arbiter of U.S. policy. He is at large part at the mercy of the permanent government, that is, the career bureaucrats who persist no matter which party is in power and without which the government cannot function. Yes, but then why is Trump appointing people like Haley and John Bolton, the archetypal warmonger? I think he appointed Haley for the same reason Barack Obama appointed Hillary Clinton to head up the State Department. He saw in her a potential rival and sought to defang her by bringing her on board. As for Bolton, it seems that Trump likes to have a variety of opinions at the table, and Bolton says just one, while Mattis, a restraining factor, is another. There's also the politics of it. Appointing Bolton as a crumb thrown to the neocons and straight-out Republican militarist types of the Rumsfeldian variety, it doesn't mean that they're going to get the whole cake. Trump's invitation to Putin to visit the White House is opposed by the White House staff, and we're told it's unlikely to happen anytime soon, which is very odd to say the least. What's preventing it? They're blackmailing him with this eternal Russian probe. Imagine the brouhaha if the visit actually happened. The war party would go ballistic. Bob Mueller would drop a few more indictments on peripheral people, and suddenly we'd be inundated with another invasion of Russian bots, shown to be quite false this week. The whole thing is one great big hoax. The collusion investigation, the Skripal poisoning, the poison gas attack by Assad, fake, faker, fakest. And it's brought to you by the same people who brought you weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, our clueless, power-hungry intelligence agencies, various and sundry discredited neocons, and Hillary Clinton and her numerous enablers and excuse makers. Surrounded by liars, leakers, traitors, and saboteurs, President Trump has managed to minimize the damage done by the war party, while he's not entirely able to neutralize them. His Korean peace initiative is going ahead, who would have believed that a few months ago, as both North Korea and the South jointly declare the never-settled Korean War to be finally over. There's a battle going on inside this administration, and as yet we don't know who the victor will be. It looks like Trump versus practically everyone else, which basically means the two sides are evenly matched, says Justin Raimondo. I'm not sure about his optimism. He says he knows who he's rooting for. A final note from Justin Raimondo. I have to say that this Trump-held hostage scenario is a bit far-fetched. After all, what's preventing him from following his policy instincts when push comes to shove? One possible factor I haven't brought up, and that is the blackmail scenario. What if there is a P-tape or some kind of incriminating evidence that our spy masters of the deep state are holding over his head? Remember the power that J. Edgar Hoover wielded. It's not like such a thing is unprecedented. There are many possibilities here. You're watching Aware on the Air, where we're trying to talk about the war news that the mainstream media doesn't bring you. I now want to turn to events in Israel this week. We often hear from friends of Aware on both the right and left that the real problem is that Israel controls American foreign policy, and until we throw off Israel's control, American foreign policy will not be able to do anything reasonable. And as I say, this charge comes from both friends on the right who see this as a regrettable interference with American sovereignty, and friends on the left who see it as a basis for America's wars in the Middle East, that they are all somehow in favor of Israel. I think the premise is wrong. American policy is not determined by Israel, influential as Israel and the Israel lobby, that is, sympathizers with Israel in the U.S., as influential as they are, American policy is determined by the American ruling class, which has been happy to employ Israel, particularly since the '67 war, and Israel destroyed the opponents of American policy in the Middle East. America is happy to use Israel for its purposes, but the purposes remain those of the American ruling class. The American ruling class is not dominated by Israel, in spite of what friends on various political sides happen to say. That is the important background, I think, to reading the news this week about the terrible things being done in Israel against the protest, the unarmed, peaceful protest of people in the Gaza Strip against the imprisonment, that's what it is, in Gaza of that population by Israel. Check out this stirring anthem to freedom in Gaza. It begins with a Palestinian child saying, "We shall overcome," and an image of Martin Luther King Jr., and then in many still pictures of the Great March of Return, these demonstrations along the fence in Gaza in the last several weeks. It conveys the strength of the unarmed resistance to the blockade, including the killing by an Israeli soldier of Yasser Murtaja, the Palestinian journalist who was one of 6 Palestinian journalists shot by Israeli snipers on April 6th. The image of this film, this brief video, is by Sana Kassem, and the video was posted by Norman Finkelstein yesterday on YouTube. The song is "Wings to Fly" by Susan Boyle, English singer. The copy accompanying the video was simple, quote, "A video dedicated to the people of Gaza as they struggle to break out of Israel's infernal prison," close quote. Unfortunately, you can't see this video because it was posted to YouTube and was taken down yesterday. YouTube sent Finkelstein a notice that suggests it regarded the video as a, quote, "sensational and shocking incitement to violence or dangerous activities," close quote. It was a video of what is going on in Gaza. YouTube continues, quote, "Upon review, we've determined that it violates our guidelines. We removed it from YouTube and assigned a community guideline strike or temporary penalty to your account. If a video contains violent or graphic content that appears to be posted in a shocking, sensational, or disrespectful manner, it's less likely to be allowed on YouTube. We also don't allow content that's intended to incite violence or encourage dangerous activities," close quote. That's what Norman Finkelstein, who posted this video, was told by YouTube. Finkelstein comments on the removal of his own site and satirizes YouTube's policy. Quote, "However, YouTube will continue to post videos like this, a stabbing attack and Rishon Lezion, evidently of a Jewish victim, in November 2015, and like this, the video concerns 2 Israelis killed by an Arab." Quote, "YouTube wants visitors to," Finkelstein says, "YouTube wants visitors to know this was not an easy decision to make. However, after many hours of agonizing reflection, we concluded that, whereas all lives are worthy, some lives are more worthy than others," close quote. The Jewish Voice for Peace Health Advisory Council, Jewish Voice for Peace, is a liberal Jewish organization in the U.S., issues this statement out of grave concern about the Israeli military's use of excessive force, including live ammunition and tear gas against protesters in Gaza. For the past 4 Fridays, demonstrations within Gaza were met by the Israeli military firing live ammunition, rubber-coated bullets, and tear gas across the border fence. The disproportional response of the Israeli military to a mostly unarmed civilian demonstration reflects a disregard for the basic human rights of Palestinians and for the safety and health of the people of the besieged Gaza Strip, where dire humanitarian conditions exist. This military response violates international law. Of further concern is the obstruction by the Israeli and United States governments to the United Nations issuing a statement condemning these actions. According to the New York Times, the Israeli military response to these protests has resulted in 37 deaths, 4 people under the age of 18, and over 3,000 wounded. Over 1,000 of the wounded were hit by live ammunition, 300 by rubber-coated bullets, and 1,000 by large doses of tear gas. Among those targeted were journalists wearing identifying vests. 1 was killed, and at least 6 have been wounded, and medics. Those with lethal wounds were shot in the chest, the back, and abdomen. Many also had been shot in the legs, pelvis, and hands. There have been no Israeli injuries. The Israeli military response violates international law, which requires that lethal force only be used where there is the threat of bodily harm. Given the well-fortified barrier fence, electronic surveillance, and inhospitable terrain, there is no justification for this response. Israeli snipers inflicting life-threatening wounds from considerable distance from the fence constitute violations of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Eric Goldstein, Deputy Middle East Director at Human Rights Watch, stated, quote, "Israeli soldiers were not merely using excessive force, but were apparently acting on orders that all but ensured a bloody military response to the Palestinian demonstrations," close quote. The Israeli military tweeted that, quote, "Nothing was carried out uncontrolled. Everything was accurate and measured, and we know where every bullet landed," close quote. This is the Jewish Voice for Peace once again. We speak out as health workers concerned about this ongoing impunity of the Israeli military to use lethal and harmful force on those demonstrating for an end to the brutal occupation and conditions they endure. The context for the weekly protests by the Palestinians is the political reality under which the population lives and suffers, an intransigent, harsh military occupation and siege. In Gaza, over half the population consists of refugees and their descendants forced from their lands when the State of Israel was founded. The Great March of Return, as the current protest is called, represents the Palestinian yearning to exercise the right of all refugees to return to their homes, a right guaranteed by international law. The Gaza protests are also demanding an end to Israeli occupation and a lifting of the siege that has devastated the Gaza infrastructure and caused severe shortages and hardships on the 2 million inhabitants of this tiny area of land. Those wounded in the protests face a health care system that lacks adequate medications and supplies. Electricity restrictions require the use of backup generators to maintain critical services. Patients with wounds beyond the capacity of the Gaza medical system are being denied exit visas to receive care in Israel or on the West Bank in the occupied territories. As in past assaults on Gaza, where medical facilities and personnel have been targeted, on Friday, April 13th, an emergency medical clinic near the encampment in Khan Yunis was hit by tear gas, causing severe illness symptoms in some of the personnel. Physicians for Human Rights, Israel, stated, quote, "The Palestinian healthcare system is one of the major victims of Israel's blockade," close quote. The Jewish Voice for Peace medical community calls for the following: a full and impartial investigation of the Israeli military's actions since March 30th in response to the Gaza protests. The investigation must be conducted by an international human rights body, such as the United Nations. The investigation should look at not just the actions of the soldiers on the Gaza border, but the orders from commanding military and government officials. An end to the siege on Gaza. This is creating a humanitarian crisis as restrictions are imposed on basic human services and goods, including health supplies and services, food and the economic infrastructure, leading to massive unemployment, poverty and aid dependence, and the obstruction of the right of movement, thus restricting and delaying transfer of patients for essential medical care outside of Gaza. Lethal force must always be a last resort and used only when there is a threat to bodily harm. International law stipulates the conditions under which lethal force can be used. Such conditions are clearly not present in Israeli military preemptive planning, including the positioning of military sharpshooters at the border fence, is a clear violation of international human rights standards, close quote. That's from Jewish Voice for Peace about the unconscionable activities of the Israeli military against this unarmed protest march occurring weekly in Gaza. You're watching Aware on the Air. We will finish up this evening with attention to another aspect of this same situation. The recent decision by the actress Natalie Portman, a joint Israeli-American citizen, the recent decision by Natalie Portman not to attend the Israeli Genesis Prize ceremony, sort of the Israeli Nobel Prizes, has made loud noise across the world. Israeli Culture Minister Miri Regev said that she was very sorry to hear that Portman fell like a ripe fruit into the hands of BDS supporters. And Minister of Strategic Affairs and Hasbara, Gilad Hardan, invoked the Star Wars analogy in response to her move. Anakin Skywalker, a character you know well from Star Wars, went through a similar process. He began to believe that Jedi Knights were evil and that the forces of the dark side were the defenders of democracy. I call on you not to let the dark side win, he wrote. This is what political discussion has become in Israel in regard to the admirable and principled stand of an American-Israeli actress. For her part, Portman tried to distance herself to some degree from the actual BDS movement in a subsequent statement. Quote, I chose not to attend these Israeli Nobel prizes that she was to receive. I chose not to attend because I did not want to appear as endorsing Benjamin Netanyahu, who was to be giving a speech at the ceremony. By the same token, I'm not part of the BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement, and do not endorse it. Like many Israelis and Jews around the world, I can be critical of the leadership in Israel without wanting to boycott the entire nation, she wrote. Still, a correspondent for the Israeli newspaper Haaretz depicted Portman as a canary in a coal mine. Quote, despite her effort to diminish the significance of her move, Portman is like a canary in the coal mine for liberal supporters of Israel everywhere. Her decision dovetails with and could very well deepen the growing disaffection of the Democratic left from Trump-toting Israel and its policies. It could jolt many Israel-supporting liberal Jews who have hitherto kept their opposition to Netanyahu and his policies to themselves to speak up, perhaps to cross the line into pro-boycott agitation altogether, this Haaretz columnist wrote. We're already seeing this jolt in action among liberal supporters of Israel in the United States. Let's look at J Street, one of the most prominent liberal Zionist groups in the U.S. On its official statement, J Street declares, 1, we do not advocate for or support any boycott, divestment, or sanctions initiative whatsoever. 2, J Street has always been and remains opposed to the global BDS movement. But still, 3, we do not oppose boycott, divestment, or sanctions initiatives that explicitly support a two-state solution, recognize Israel's right to exist, and focus only on occupied territory beyond the Green Line. Close quote. J Street's language here adheres to a line of thinking in liberal Zionist circles concerning BDS, which advocates for a selective boycott aimed solely at Israeli activities in the occupied Palestinian territories. But even with this in mind, this is how J Street President Jeremy Ben-Ami responded to Portman's recent move. Quote, Natalie Portman has every right to listen to her conscience and express her concerns when it comes to the current policies and direction of Israel and its government. Concerns that are shared by so many American Jews and supporters of Israel around the world. Instead of responding to her decision with indignation, Israeli officials and supporters of Israel should respect this right and encourage Portman to speak out openly and honestly. Close quote. Ben-Ami hedges with concerns regarding current policy and direction of Israel and its government, but it cannot go unnoticed that he's supporting an act which is in direct opposition to the whole of the state of Israel, as it directly and explicitly targets its head of state. Portman's act is not focusing upon occupied territory beyond the Green Line. This is not the selective boycott. Has J Street suddenly changed policy because it's a prominent liberal Zionist doing the boycotting? Another prominent liberal Zionist organization, Peace Now, has now started a Portman support campaign called I'm With Her. Where did they get that? Saying, because I care about Israel, I must stand up against violence, corruption, inequality, and the abuse of power. Wait a minute. Shemi Shalav disparagingly wrote that Portman has become a new poster girl for the anti-Zionist left and the BDS movement. But now it appears she's become a poster girl for liberal Zionists too. What is happening is that Natalie Portman has created an opening, possibly and probably, perhaps unwittingly so, but an important one indeed. You have been watching Aware on the Air, presented by members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign, Urbana, a local peace group, in the 17th week of 2018, another week in which the world can see that the most extensive global terrorism is U.S. worldwide war-making. My thanks tonight to Dr. No, J.B. Nicholson Research. See No's notes on the Facebook page for Aware on the Air, along with articles referred to tonight and other things, including a link to Noam Chomsky and Daniel Ellsberg discussing nuclear war. Betsy Reed, the editor-in-chief of The Intercept, is moderating a discussion between Noam Chomsky and Daniel Ellsberg on the topic of nuclear policy and war. That discussion takes place tonight at the University of Arizona and will be live streamed by The Intercept and archived there afterwards. Our show is produced and directed. News from Neptune is produced and directed by Let's start over again. Aware on the Air is produced and directed by Jason Liggett and Ethan Young and Andrew Scholarly. Thanks to whom also this program and others like it will be available on YouTube and archive.org. The Aware meeting this coming Sunday from 5 to 6 p.m. will be held at the Hammerhead Coffee Shop at University Avenue at Wright Street in Campustown. Finally, Aware honors those who reveal the crimes of the U.S. government, which the rest of the world knows about and Americans don't, as Natalie Portman is revealing crimes of the Israeli government. Manning, Assange, Snowden, and others, truth-tellers persecuted by the U.S. government. Now, this is Carl Estabrook for Karen Aram, Karen Evans, Levy, Stuart Levy, David Green, Ed Mandel, and other members and friends of Aware, saying in the words of the late Edward Murrow, good night and good luck.